Does God know the future free choices of literally every human being that has ever existed, down to the specificity of the second and the molecule? Or is there even one instance, one time anywhere in the scriptures that God describes himself as being surprised by an outcome of someone's choices, or a person having done something that he did not foresee? If God does know absolutely every choice that anyone will ever make, what we are dealing with is a 100% closed future. Whether God determined it or whether God simply foreknows everything that will happen, nothing will change. Everything is going to transpire exactly as God always knew that it would. But if there is one possibility, even if it's only that one possibility, we are dealing with a partially open future. We're dealing with a future in which there was something that could have gone either way. I hope you've been enjoying this series where I have been responding to Steve Gregg and Braxton Hunter on the Trinity Radio show. I anticipate and I hope that this will be the last of my response videos to Steve Gregg and Braxton Hunter for this discussion around open theist proof texts. I do have a fair bit of video left to go, but I'm going to do my best to make it through all of the rest of this and give my responses in a timely way. So let's just get them moving.
All right. We're going to go into a section now where God doesn't seem to know what people would choose to do. And so that begins with 1 Kings chapter 22 and verse 20, which says, "The Lord said, who will entice Ahab to go up and fall at Ramoth Gilead? And one said this while another said that. Then a spirit came forward and stood before the Lord and said, I will entice him. The Lord said to him, how? And he said, I will go out and be a deceiving spirit in the mouth of all his prophets.
I mentioned this one last week.
You are to entice him and also prevail. Go and do so." So God is asking how this is going to come about.
As if he didn't know. Well, obviously, God is asking for suggestions. Now, this is Micaiah has seen a vision of God surrounded by the heavenly court and asking advice from his attendants of what the best way would be to get Ahab to go out to Ramoth Gilead to die. And, this conversation may have literally taken place. And Micaiah may have actually seen something that did happen in heaven.
Good for Steve.
Or as many visions, many prophetic visions, they are dramatizations of an idea. Zechariah has a number of these. Where he sees things, there's conversations going on, there's different colored horsemen and the angel, they're having conversations. And the bottom line is there's a certain one point being made by the whole vision, which may or may not correspond to literal conversations that have taken place. They are there to illustrate and make their point. I mean, even Zechariah 11 about the 30 pieces of silver betrayal. That's a whole story about Zechariah taking a couple of staffs and saying, pay me what you think I'm worth, and breaking staff. Those things didn't literally happen, but they're making points. I believe it was a vision in that case. Crowning, in Zechariah 3, we have a prophecy in which Joshua, the high priest, is standing in filthy garments, and Satan is there, accusing him, and God says, give him clean garments. That didn't literally happen. That's simply a visual dramatization of something that God is trying to get across. And here, this may be true here too.
But it is something he's trying to get across accurately. It is something that he's trying to communicate in an accurate way, not in an inaccurate way. And I don't know, I don't even particularly know why this verse is used as an open theist proof text. If it is, it's not, I don't think, a very good one. It's a super interesting passage, and there's a lot of really interesting stuff going on in it. I don't know if I'm making the connection there. But at the same time, when God's prophets express something, it's an accurate representation of the way things are, not an inaccurate one.
In any case, it doesn't actually say that God's ignorant. Just like God will listen to our prayers and our suggestions, and he'll evaluate them and answer them or not, according to his wisdom, whoever he's asking.
Okay, but then that application of this concept is really weird, because if God, A, knew all along that I would pray, and B, knew all along that he would answer or not answer, and that C, what the answer would be, and all of the downstream second, third, fourth order consequences of what my prayer being answered would be, then he had an answer prepared ahead of time, no matter what, and he is actually not in any way responding to me. Not really. My prayer didn't actually unlock anything. It was simply a fact of the matter baked into the script ahead of time. Again, I'm not saying that God is the one who wrote the script, but that's also a problematic aspect of like a simple foreknowledge view, is that God is essentially just dealt a hand and he knows already what he will do and how he will respond. But the shape of the future is already settled ahead of time, and he knows where he will and will not intervene. And the state of things, the state of reality, if we're not actually in a war, but God has predicted absolutely everything that will happen and knows exactly what he will do and when, then the state of the world is pretty weird if God knew everything ahead of time and is responding exactly in the ways that he would wish to respond. But if he responds in the moment according to his own great wisdom and power. And we are at war where not every outcome is known ahead of time, but there are emergent circumstances that require differences and shifts in strategy and policies, as from our video a couple of weeks ago. Then I think all of those things need to be taken into account.
You can hear this court, these spirits that are around him, maybe a Michael Heiser type of, Council of the Gods or something, or maybe it's just angels.
I miss Mike.
But God says, well, how should we do this? This is what I'm going to do. I'm going to get him dead. I'm going to get him dead at Ramoth Gilead. What's the best way to do this? And getting suggestions and saying, okay, let's do that one. I don't think God needed the suggestions. I think this is, again, anthropomorphism. God doesn't need advice. People need advice. God.
So, sure, anthropomorphism the phrase is doing a lot of heavy lifting here. I don't think it's anthropomorphic for God to ask for advice when he already has a plan in place and he already is, basically going to make a thing happen. That's not anthropomorphic necessarily. That even is a bridge too far. If he says that this conversation could literally have happened, it's not anthropomorphic to ask for advice, even if you already know what you're going to do and you have a really solid plan. This is God in his character acting the way that he always has as a being who delegates decision-making authority to other people. And he delegates the concept of Adam naming the animals is something he delegated to Adam's control and purview. Even though he didn't need to, God was perfectly capable of naming animals. Nevertheless, he wanted to share power. He wanted to share authority with beings in love relationships with him who wanted to work with him to take the world someplace beautiful. That's what Genesis 1 and 2 is. So in this same case, when God is in a heavenly throne room having a sort of a war room meeting with his divine council, he doesn't need the advice, but he's delegated some governing authority over the creation and the way that things ought to be done to a boardroom, to a board of beings which have a say in the governing structures of the universe. Like, at least that's the way that Michael Heiser would put it. So whether God needs the advice or not, that doesn't make this an anthropomorphism. It's simply God acting the way that he always has, which is as one who shares power with those who are in his circle.
God doesn't need advice. It's God's being depicted as a king with his counselors. There's nothing actually that indicates he doesn't know the future.
Right. I don't get this passage being used that way.
What's the best way to do this?
Yeah, that's right. Okay, Jeremiah 7:31. We've got a few here that are similar. Jeremiah 7:31 says, "They have built the high places of Topheth, which is in the valley of the son of Hinnom, to burn their sons and their daughters in the fire, which I did not command, and it did not come into my mind." Now that sounds pretty tough, Steve. What's your response to that?
These verses, there's three just like it. And
I'll go ahead and read those. In fact,
they're all the same. Yeah. They're all the same. Go ahead.
Yeah. Jeremiah 19:5 says, "And have built the high places of Baal to burn their sons in the fire as burnt offerings to Baal, a thing which I had never commanded or spoke of, nor did it enter my mind." And then Jeremiah 32:35, "They have built the high places of Baal. They're in the valley of Ben Hinnom, to cause their sons and their daughters to pass through the fire of Molech, which I had not commanded them, nor had it entered my mind that they should do this abomination to cause Judah to sin." So there are the three there that are very similar.
And so the question is, what does it mean it didn't enter my mind? Does it mean, well, I never thought that had happened? Or does it mean it never crossed my mind to give commands like that? He says, I didn't command you to do that. It never crossed my mind to command such a thing. And you can sort of see it in the latter one, especially. It did not enter my mind that you should do this. He's basically saying this is the furthest thing to who I am and the kind of orders I would give. This is like the opposite direction of anything I would command. The question is openness true or is it false? If it's true, then God didn't know. If it's false, that he didn't. But it doesn't say that he didn't know. I actually don't agree with that.
I actually don't even agree with that phrasing. I don't agree with that framing of the problem, because it's very possible that God knew in some sense that this thing was possible. He knew that they would do it. And I agree with the phrasing of what I think he's saying there is it never entered my mind to command you to do something like that. That's what I think the passages are saying. But even if I think he's saying it didn't enter into my mind to command you to do such a thing, that doesn't therefore mean that this was an exhaustively foreknown eventuality from before the creation of the world that never emerged as a possibility where before it was not a possibility or before it was a remote possibility. That was actualized by decisions made by people who are profoundly foolish and rebellious, that God hoped they would choose a different route. And when they did not choose a different route, he was dismayed. The only way that makes sense is if there is an open future. It's not 100% open. It's not 100% settled. It's somewhere in between. And the settled things are settled by a mixture of God decreeing things and bringing them about by his own power, and by God being able to extrapolate and knowing that some things are going to happen happen with certainty, and there really is no way to avoid it. But then there are some things that, in the shape of reality, that at least the way the Bible depicts it, is that God didn't anticipate it coming, or he's very dismayed at the outcome. It did not go the way he wanted it to, which speaks to the openness of the future, because you can't respond to those ways in an honest way if you knew all along that it would come, or especially if you determined it to be that way. It just makes hash of these passages. It's an incoherent way of interpreting God's own actions in this page.
It's saying what didn't enter his mind never crossed his mind to give orders like that. I didn't command you to do things like that.
I think that's what it's saying.
So he's not really talking about what he knew, but would be consistent with his mind to give command. So I don't see that as relative to the foreknowledge question.
All right. So that brings us to yet a new section where God tests people to seemingly to find out information about them. So we'll begin here with Genesis chapter 22.
Surprising
and verse 12,
it took us this long.
And it says, he said, do not stretch out your hand against the lad and do nothing to him. For now I know that you fear God, since you have not withheld your son, your only son, from me. So we have the sacrifice of Isaac here. And it looks like God is saying, now that I see how you've acted, now I know, seemingly implying to the open theist, I would imagine, I didn't know before, but now I know.
Why the language of, it seems like, seemingly implying? No, buddy, that's how it's written, Braxton. I don't know. Can I call you Braxton? Are we on a first name basis? How well do we know each other? It's written that way. It gives, on the pages of inspired scripture, both the timing and the reason for his gain in knowledge. Now I know. Now, there are going to be some people in the chat. I bet if I opened up the chat over there, I'd see Phil Bear talking about, well, the angel of the Lord isn't the Lord. I disagree vehemently, I think on biblical grounds, where the angel of the Lord initiates a conversation and then there's no change in context. There's no shifting of where, the person's attention goes. For example, Gideon on the threshing floor, the angel of the Lord comes and talks to him. And then Gideon's carrying on this conversation with him. And then it says, Yahweh looked at him and said blank. I think the angel of the Lord is the Lord. The angel of the Lord is just God in a form coming to speak to someone. Some people would say it's Jesus. I don't even think I need to make that case. I'm simply saying it is Yahweh coming as a messenger to speak to someone. It's the angel of the Lord, I believe, that's also in the burning bush talking to Moses. And then he's carrying on a conversation with Moses from the burning bush, and it is the angel of the Lord. Let me just go see if Phil Bear is over there. If I'm right, that'd be crazy. Well, Phil Bear is definitely in the chat. I don't know if he has said anything about the angel of the Lord, but I'll keep my eyes open.
Didn't know before, but now I know.
Yeah, this one and the other ones in this section all mention that God tests so that he will know or to see if they will do this or that thing.
That's how it's written.
What's interesting, though, is the others in this section actually do suggest, I want to see what you will do. In this case, he doesn't say, I did this to see what you would do. I did this to see if you fear me or not. The thing that he said, I now know, is not now I know you'll obey me. Now I know that you won't sin and rebel. He's saying, now I know that you fear me. Abram did this because he feared God. This revealed that he feared God, to be sure. But didn't God know his heart before that? Doesn't God know the hearts of all men? This is, again, not saying I didn't know the future. If we take it literally and not anthropomorphically, then we have to say God didn't even know the present. God didn't even know whether Abram feared him or not. Well, doesn't God know?
No, because I know I can trust my wife. Like, I know I can trust her. But then if we're in a situation where, like, a baby is choking and she is the only person around who knows the Heimlich maneuver, and then she demonstrates that she is a trustworthy person and a capable and competent person, and then she flips the baby around and does a very specific kind of the specific kind of Heimlich maneuver you need in order to clear an obstruction from the throat of a baby, and she pulls it off. I'm like, man, now I know I can trust you. There's a possibility that she'd crumble under the pressure before, but I can say, now I know I can trust you. There's a sense in which, sure, Abraham feared God, but this is written in an indeterminate way, and the entire purpose of a test is to see what's really going on and then to prove it so that I know. God is testing him to know that he fears him. And it says what's in his heart in these other passages is fear of God, not something that transpires in the heart. Is not God in some way testing to know what's in Abraham's heart? Is that not the point? So sure, he knows Abraham's present heart, but there's this tiny percentage chance that Abraham will completely cave at the moment of highest pressure, when the knife is actually in the air and he is being tasked with killing Isaac, which is this is, again, the crazy story. A lot of people really recoil at this story, and I want to be sensitive to that, and I want to make a video about it at some point, sort of looking at the context. But up until the moment he is literally going to do it, there is a percentage chance that exists that he'll go the other way. He succeeds to the end. C.S. Lewis talks about this in the context of temptation, that he says that someone who gives in at the first sign of temptation does not know the real weight of temptation. It's only someone who endures to the end of temptation and makes it through the other side that understands its real weight. If you give in all the time, then you don't understand temptation. You don't know how powerful temptation is, because it's never actually tried you. It's never actually worked against you to try to cause you to do something. And he goes on to talk about how Jesus is the only one who knows the real weight of temptation, really, because he faces temptation and then never, ever, ever gives in. But the more you face a temptation, the more you are going to exhaust your own human weakness and willpower in trying to resist it. That's the point Lewis is making. So I think that there is a sense in which when we read this passage, that's what's happening with Abraham. Abraham has at any point the possibility of failing this test. He could always give in. He could always turn away. He could, at any moment, God may know that this thing is in doubt until it's over. It's not over until it's over, right? But the minute that Abraham, I think that the way that this ticks over to 100%, it's going to happen. It's like win probability in sports. I don't know if you guys have ever seen these probability charts, but while the clock is still ticking, the game could go either way. The win probability swings wildly if one team takes a pretty big lead over the other. But if the other team starts to chip away at that lead, the win probability starts to swing the other way. It used to be, hey, it's a 95% chance that if things continue as they are going, that this team will win the game and this team will lose. There's a 95% chance because it's a basketball game. And my Denver Nuggets, led by the best basketball player maybe ever, Nikola Jokic, is up by 30 points. Like, it's a secure lead. But then because Nikola Jokic sits on the bench for a while and the other team scores 28 points, now the lead is dwindling. The win probability swings back this way. But there's a moment where the win probability ticks over to 100%. Maybe it's actually impossible for the other team to score enough points in 5 seconds to actually win the game. And it ticks over right at the end because now the outcome is certain. There is no getting away from it. It is certain. But up until then, there was always the chance that something crazy could happen. I think of this as kind of like a win probability chart where it's probable that Abraham could win, but we don't know until he has faced the test to the end and come through the other side having succeeded. And the longer you face a test, the more you face a temptation, the longer you face a difficulty. And God isn't the one who tempts people. Okay, hear me clearly. James is super clear about that. But if you're facing a test, you have the possibility of failing that test up until the last second of the test. And it's only if you pass the test through to the end that your character is proven. And that God can now say, now I know. And he's doing this specifically to figure out Abraham's fear and respect and reverence and awe level towards God. Is he really willing in every circumstance to, through the end, follow through and do all this stuff so that he can work with Abram as a covenant partner? That's God's goal here. Anyway, there's a lot to this, but Phil, it says now I know means you have provided visible evidence. It's a colloquialism, or it means now I know. Anyway.
Know who fears him and doesn't do the eyes of the Lord in every place, beholding the good and the evil. They run to and fro throughout the earth, seeking one whose heart is perfect toward his God. Does God recognize these people when he sees them? Does fears him who doesn't? I would think so. So in saying, now I know that you fear me, I don't think it could possibly be that he's saying, I wasn't sure if you did or not. I wasn't sure what was in your heart, but now I know. I think the word that I may know, what you know from testing is what you demonstrated, is what you brought to the surface, what is now knowable to all. I have made this a knowable thing, a visible, a revealed thing. And years ago, when I was dealing with this verse, I'm talking decades ago.
I'm not sure if you guys can see. I really, and we'll get to this in a minute, I really like, some of these people in the chat are awesome people. The Twitchy Theologian, like one of my favorite Calvinists ever. He is super ironic. He's super caring. He is, he resists a lot of the pressure that's on him in his camp to be really rude and unkind to people in my camp, for example. Like, he's had Warren McGrew on. Warren's had Twitchy Theologian on. He's a really good dude. I love Jamie Russell, probably one of my favorite Adventists ever. He's awesome. Chris Date, even. Again, we talked about him. Chris Date and I disagree on a few things. We agree on the nature of hell, and he was an instrumental piece in my journey away from eternal conscious torment. For that, I'm eternally grateful to God for Chris Date. And I even agree with what he wrote here. What didn't enter God's mind is the thought to command them to do so, that they should do it. But this comment down here, some things aren't true until they happen. Exactly. It's not as if God was testing to see 100% whether there was reverence to God in the contents of his heart. That's not the point. The point is that God was testing him, putting him to a test to see if that was what would win out. It's the whole meme of like, there's two wolves inside of you, right? Maybe there's the fearing God and reverencing him as Lord wolf, and there is the seizing autonomy and trusting in my own understanding of right and wrong and kind of following the serpent wolf in me. And the one that wins is the one you feed, right? The test is which of these two wolves is going to win when it's under pressure. And Abraham fails in lots of other contexts too. So it's not this binary thing. It's like the binary thing is the outcome. Did you pass or did you fail the test? But we're all a spectrum. The Solzhenitsyn line of the line of good and evil runs through the center of every human heart is true during a test as well. The purpose of the test is to see which part of you is going to win. And then he says, now I know that the you fear me part of your heart, that wolf won. That's the part that we proved that out in the test. Good. I needed to test you first to kind of see where you were at really. And now I know that you fear me. Anyway, boy, that picture makes Steve Gregg look really angry. He's not.
No, in the lexicons. And there's like all the
I want to back him up here. Let me back him up here.
Talking decades ago, I was interested in this verse. I looked up the word no in the lexicons. And there's like all the different ways that the Hebrew word can be used. Made up. There must have been dozens and dozens of ways. And it's like a big paragraph.
It's a very plastic word.
In the Strong's Concordance, and I would use other lexicons now, but I was using the Strong's. There's like a really long list of ways that this would, and among them was to reveal or to disclose. So, I mean, it's not just having cognizance of something. It can mean I've now.
But who is he disclosing it to? It's just him, Abraham, Isaac, and the ram up on the. Is he disclosing that Abraham fears God to the ram? The ram's not going to do anything with it. He's about to die. Like, is it just for Abraham's sake? Is it for Isaac's sake? Why doesn't it say that? What it says is, now I know that you fear God, because you were not willing to spare your only son. So, but it's just not what it says. Sure, it can mean that, but you can tell from the context clues what's happening in the passage, the way that it's actually written, and then what transpires afterwards, that God puts Abraham to the test to know what's in his heart for the purpose of more closely partnering with him as a covenant partner to further his purposes in the world. A choice which does not always have the outcomes God wants, by the way, in the ensuing chapters.
I've now revealed, I've now made knowable, I've now revealed what's in your heart. Which is true, that he didn't know what was in Abraham's heart behind that before that would raise other theological problems worse than anything that opens theology. You know, if God
Michael Faber says,
he doesn't know his own heart, he doesn't know what we think, he doesn't know what from inside or not. Well, then we've got real problems. I don't have any real problems if he doesn't know the future. If God doesn't know for sure what I'm going to do tomorrow, I don't care. I mean, I don't either. God and I can work it out when that happens. You know, if God doesn't know the future, it's not a problem to me. Like a chess master is the example always given you. The chess master doesn't know what his opponent's going to make, and he can play a whole room full of opponents at the same time. He doesn't know any of them. So he can still beat him because he's the best. And
God love you, Steve Gregg.
It won't prevent him from winning. It won't prevent him from, getting his will done. So whether God knows or not, the future is of no concern to me. I'm only interested in exegesis. I'm only interested in knowing what the Bible teaches, because it can go either way as far as I'm concerned. But if God doesn't know what's in my heart, if God doesn't know me at all now, that is greater concern. That'd be a much greater theological concern. And that's not what we're saying. That would be what you could prove from this verse, not the fourth, if you could prove anything. But of course, the fact that it cannot be that God was ignorant of what was in Abram's heart before this moment means this is anthropomorphic.
No.
As I believe the other cases are that we'll see in the examples.
Steve, you were that close.
That was very interesting. That may be my favorite answer so far. All right, Exodus chapter 16 and verse 4 says, Then the Lord said to Moses, Behold, I will rain bread from heaven for you, and the people shall go out and gather a day's portion every day, and that I may test them whether or not they will walk in my instruction. Yeah,
same thing. I'm going to test them and bring out whether they're going to be obedient or not. Now, I will say this. In my opinion, one of the major themes of the whole Bible is this life is a test. That's why there was a tree in the Garden of Eden. That's why there's a tester. That's why God even allows there to be a devil, is because we are being tested. We're being vetted for the destiny of reigning with Christ. And reigning with Christ, the one qualification we're vetted for is total loyalty, being faithful unto death. If we're faithful and loyal, we pass that test. If we endure, we'll reign with him, the Bible says. So that's what this life is for. It's vetting, it's testing. Now, the question arises, well, why does God need to test if he already knows what we would do? If we're not going to actually do it in real time, he doesn't know we're going to do it because it's not going to happen. If we say God knows what future things are going to happen, it doesn't mean that he knows what might have happened. Maybe he does, maybe he doesn't, but that's a different subject. If God knows I'm going to sin tomorrow, it's because I actually am going to sin tomorrow. If God's just going to cancel that part out and just know that I wouldn't, well, then there's no test at all. I have no culpability. I have no involvement. I'm not an agent. God has to test us so that we will actually do what we are going to do, even if he knows we're going to. We still have to do it.
But that's just not what these passages say, though. Like, it doesn't say I'm testing you to refine you and cause you to become the kind of person who follows through on what I desire for you to do. This is just not what he says. That's not what any of the passages say. The passages say that he tests to know. He tests to know, he seeks to find, he guides and leads and protects and provides with the hope that others will respond when he does so. And they frequently don't. God didn't get the outcomes he wanted in lots of these different situations. Or he undertook a plan and a course of action that backfired, that went wrong, not because of anything that he did, but because of fault in the person that was chosen to partner with God. That's not God's fault. It's only God's fault if he knew ahead of time exactly how it would go. Again, we've got my owner of a company and CEO analogy. If I go and I hire a CEO and all the signs to everyone are that this guy is rock solid, he's going to do a great job, maybe he's even succeeded before, and we're all expecting rightly that it's just going to rock, it's going to go really, really, really well, and I hire him to run my company, and then he does the whole sacrificing a pig to Zeus in the corner office of the CEO thing, and then burns the building down and, I don't know, does awful things to his own employees and kills some of them. He's at fault unless I knew he was going to do that. And then I'm the one responsible. Oh, man, I've got a video to do here.
And so, he tested them to see if they'd walk in his ways or not. Well, yeah, we're all being tested that way. I believe all of life is a test. The fact that we're tested doesn't speak to me one way or the other about God's foreknowledge of what we'll do.
Yeah, the only objection I could see there from someone who's not an open theologian would be from the Molinist perspective, saying that God does have knowledge of what might be in other scenarios. But on this understanding, you make a really good point that he knows what we will freely do because we're going to freely do those things. And he knows that will happen. But that still means we have to play out what's going to happen.
Yeah, I mean, if we say God knows all future history, it's because there's going to be a future history. If there's not going to be a future history, then he doesn't know the future.
Whoa, future history. That sounds like an album name. The problem is that on both of these schemes that either A, the information comes to God too late for it to be providentially useful to him. So, for example, the middle knowledge is not something that God has possessed from time eternal. It's something that God has possessed from the moment he decided to create. Now he knows the outcomes of every subjunctive counterfactual truth set, which in the way that Steve phrased it, I like the idea. I think I agree with the idea of all of reality for every one of us being phrased as a test or being framed as a test. I agree with that. I think that that's true because that's a theme that shows up everywhere in the Bible. People are under a test constantly if they are going to give in to the temptation of the serpent in the same way that Adam and Eve did in the garden, or if they're going to trust not in their own definitions of right and wrong, but follow after God's definitions of right and wrong and choose to follow his wisdom and submit to him, in which case they're going to become the same people that return to the garden in the end. Reality is a test in that way. Molinism reduces the entire universe to a trolley problem, like a trolley problem that sets off a series of other trolley problems. And it reduces God to, after the moment he creates, he's simply doing the best he can with all the possible outcomes that are going to happen. It is an eternally cascading train wreck of outcomes that are, this is the best God can do, because he's optimizing for some goal that means he has to allow for all kinds of other horrible, awful things to happen. And if you happen to be the person that's caught in the crossfire, too bad. God's got this utilitarian balance where he's trying to get like the most of the thing he does want, even if you are caught in the crossfire. And all God can do in that scheme is just shrug his shoulders and say, sorry, you're a casualty in the war here. You needed to be sacrificed so that I could go and get this other thing. There's no other way for me to get the thing that I wanted than to run you over by a trolley. Future history, though. I'm just coming back to that phrase. Man, that's really
future history. Now, Molinism would say, well, he can think of all kinds of possible future histories. Well, true, but those are all imaginary. They don't exist. So I'm not a Molinist. Again, that's another view I have serious problems with. I just don't see a real good reason to accept it. I think there's easier explanations of these things.
Yeah. All right. So we've now arrived at Deuteronomy chapter 8, verse 2, which says, you shall remember all the way which the Lord your God has led you in the wilderness these 40 years, that he might humble you, testing you to know what was in your heart, whether you would keep his commandments or not. Same answer?
Yeah, it's interesting, too. He says to know what is in your heart. And, of course, what's in your heart will determine whether you're going to obey or not. But it's interesting that knowing what's in the heart is something that we assume God knows, quite apart from any question of knowing the future. He's testing to show what is in the heart. He's testing to see what kind of person we are. Now, what's in the heart is seen visually in the decisions we make in the future, but they arise from what's already in our heart, and God is not unfamiliar with that. Although he says he's testing us to find that out.
Yeah, and I want to say that I realize to find it out that typically I would be interacting a little more in the chat and those sorts of things, but there's a lot going on my screen here to keep this moving. So forgive me for that. Okay, Deuteronomy chapter 13, verses 1 through 3 says, if a prophet or a dreamer of dreams arises among you and gives you a sign or a wonder, and the sign or wonder comes true, concerning which he spoke to you, saying, let us go after other gods whom you have not known, and let us serve them. You shall not listen to the words of that prophet or the dreamer of dreams, for the Lord your God is testing you to find out if you love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul. Anything extra to say on this passage?
No, once again, he's testing to see what's in their heart. In other words, to reveal what's in their heart. The test actually brings to the surface, not as if God couldn't read it, but no one else could. And God, speaking anthropomorphically, we all need to know what's in there, so we're going to bring it out through this test.
Yeah, he's laying
it's
it
just
all
not
out
what
on
it
the table.
says.
Yeah.
But he's not just laying it out all out on the table. He's testing to know. It says to know what's in your heart. And it's not just to declare, and it's not just to lay bare for everyone. God makes decisions based on the information he gathers from the test. It's framed as a test to gain information. God then gains that information, and then he makes decisions based on the choice of the person who either passed or failed the test. The reality is that the state of the test is indeterminate until the test is over. You could pass the test or you could fail the test at any time until the test is over. My goodness.
Okay, Judges chapter 2, verses 21 and 22 says, I also will no longer drive out before them any of the nations which Joshua left when he died, in order to test Israel by them, whether they will keep the way of the Lord to walk in it as their fathers did or not. Anything additional to add here?
Same phenomenon. All of life is a test. And the reason for the test is to expose our loyalty or disloyalty, really, to God.
Yeah. All right, Second Chronicles chapter 32, verse 31 says, even in the matter of the envoys of the rulers of Babylon, who sent to him to inquire of the wonder that had happened in the land, God left him alone only to test him, that he might know all that was in his heart. So similar thing again, if I'm understanding what you've said so far, this is a question about the present, what's in the man's heart. And this is just going to be a displaying out of the actions that bear all of that out.
Right. And I don't think any Christian theologian believes that God doesn't know what's in our hearts. But the fact that he tests in order to know it means obviously in order to expose it, in order to bring it to the surface.
Yeah.
Lay it.
The problem, again, what's in a man's heart is a very complicated matter. None of us is 100% one way or the other way. The purpose of the test is to show when you are under pressure, when you are being tried, when you have to, when the rubber meets the road, when you are up against the wall, what are you going to prove? What are you going to prioritize? There's a concept in, I think I learned this first from Jocko Willink. You don't rise to the occasion. You sink to the level of your training. And so there's a sense in which it's like, what is this person going to default to when they are under duress? And that's an indeterminate question until you're put to the test and it gets proven. Now, the problem is that there was good and evil in your heart prior to the test. God is looking to see which one you're going to choose, which one you're going to prioritize, what's really at work in your heart, which one is going to win out. That's what needs proving. And he puts the test forward so that he can know which one of those things is the priority for you because of the test. And it's indeterminate until he does so.
All right, so the next passage is the first in our final section here, where it looks like God is not certain about the future. And in Exodus chapter 4, verse 9, it says, but if they will not believe even these two signs or heed what you say, then you shall take some water from the Nile and pour it on the dry ground, and the water which you take from the Nile will become blood on the dry ground.
Yeah. Again, when God says, if they don't, or if they do this, if they don't believe, then do this. He's just giving instructions. He's not saying, God's not saying whether he knows they will or not. He's saying you're going to learn, you're going to find out whether they will or not. When you do this, if this is what you find to be their reaction, then do this. God doesn't say he doesn't know. It's evident that he's speaking to Moses as a person who doesn't know, as Moses doesn't know. So it's sort of like in that whole same conversation, Moses said, well, what if they ask me who it is that sent me? What do I say then? See, Moses is not sure how the people.
Yeah, but Moses definitely assumed that the future was settled and that God was going to, he just said, sure thing, God, anything you say, it's going to go exactly the way that you said it's going to go. And it's going to work out exactly the way that you wanted it to work out. I don't even need to think about it. I'll just kind of go with the flow, and whatever you want to have happen will happen. No, he says, I'm not really a big talker, God. I don't think that's going to work, God. And he pushes back, and God meets him there. And then they come up with a plan that's different because, again, you go back to my video, I think it's 2 videos ago, where it's talking about this exact passage, I didn't even know this showed up later in the video. I'm reacting to all this live. I'm not preparing my responses and my stuff ahead of time. James White would be proud. But I'm literally looking at this and saying, if you go back to the context of that passage, God says, the sign that will be unto you is that you will go serve God on this mountain. And that's the thing he proposes to Moses as the proof that he's going to, as like the sign that he should give to the people that he's going to win out and that this thing is going to go the right way. Moses doesn't buy it. He doesn't think the people will buy it. And then God gives him like a cascading list of signs to try. And he states it in indeterminate terms. It's like, if it goes this way, then do this. And perhaps they'll believe this. But if they don't, then do this. He doesn't say in any way, it doesn't read at all, like, give them this sign. Some people will believe, some people won't. For the people who don't believe, you're going to do this sign. And then these people will believe and others won't. And then you'll get all of the rest of the ones who don't believe by using this sign. That's not the way that it's phrased. The way that it is stated is indeterminately, as if some people might believe. If they don't believe that, then try this one. If they don't believe that, then try this one. And we know that because the end result of all of this discussion is that the shape of the plan changes pretty dramatically from when God starts this thing to where it ends, what actually transpires. But we already handled this passage.
The people are going
I
to
might skip ahead.
And God just plays like this. Well, if they ask you that, tell them I am that I am. You know, God is talking about things that are unrevealed about the future, unrevealed to Moses. Moses says, well, what if it goes this way? What if it goes that way? And God says, well, if it goes that way, do this. If it goes that way, do that. It's not really addressing whether God knows the way it's going to go or doesn't know. He's just answering a man according to a man's own ignorance.
All right. Exodus 13:17 says, now when Pharaoh had let the people go, God did not lead them by the way of the land of the Philistines, even though it was near. For God said, the people might change their minds when they see war and return to Egypt.
Yeah, they might, but it didn't happen because he didn't take them there. Mm-hmm. It says the reason God didn't do that is because it could cause that to happen.
It was indeterminate.
Right, it could, you know.
God was prognosticating, looking ahead and considering that that set of circumstances might lead in a direction that he didn't want. And so he chose a different direction. He chose a different set of circumstances because he did not want that outcome. This is God's thought process happening in real time. If he's having real-time thoughts, and it's being described as real-time thoughts where he is strategizing which path to go down because he thinks that this path, with his present knowledge, he looks at this path and he says, that set of outcomes, if we go down that route, is bad. I don't like the odds there. I don't like what we're dealing with there. We're going to go a different route, kind of like Gandalf wanting to go through the pass of Caradhras rather than through Moria, because he knows there's a Balrog down in Moria. He knows that Moria has been taken out by orcs and that it's infested with all kinds of horrible beings, including a cave troll. He doesn't want to go down that route. He prefers to go the Caradhras route, even though Saruman is going to be attacking them from the hillside, because although it's bad, it's better. It's the better of the two options. The same thing could be happening here. Nevertheless, when God goes down this route and they get to Mount Sinai, a whole bunch of stuff happens that he doesn't want to have happen down there either. And he gets mad because the people are disobedient, and he gets a lot of outcomes he doesn't want as a result of this story. But I have no problem with saying that God knew the present circumstances and he didn't like the possibilities and the outcomes on the other side of it. But neither did he know exactly what would happen, because it's just not phrased that way. It's not stated that way.
That's why he didn't do it. So it's not that God didn't know what would happen. It's not like God didn't know the future. In this way,
he knew a possible future.
Dictated the future by not putting that temptation in front of them. You know, if they were tempted this way, they might very well do something I don't want them to do in this case. So I'm going to deliver them from that particular. So
if I leave my 3-year-old daughter in the front yard, she might wander into traffic. So I'm going to not leave her in the front yard, but keep her in the house.
Right. So what is it about the future you didn't know there?
Right. There's nothing. All right. Okay. Numbers chapter 14, verse 11. The Lord said to Moses, how long will this people spurn me? I think we did this one already, didn't we?
That's where they came up earlier, and I said I think it was misplaced. Yeah, we had it for a second.
Yeah. Okay. So we'll just skip that one for now. Okay. Hosea chapter 8, verse 5 says, he has rejected your calf, O Samaria, saying, my anger burns against them. How long will they be incapable of innocence? Now, I'm imagining that you're going to say this is another rhetorical statement of exasperation.
Exactly. It's not like God is asking somebody to tell him when they're going to change. You know, when are they going to do this? Like, God doesn't know, but maybe the person he's asking does. You know, I mean, why would God ask information about the future?
Sure, it's a rhetorical question, but it's betraying exasperation, which is only true if it's not something you anticipated happening exactly the way that it did, and in fact knew 100% exactly what would happen exactly the way that it did. That's just a goofy way of looking at this. Just goofy.
The future, suggesting that a man might even know. But God doesn't. I mean, it's simply a rhetorical question. It's more of a rebuke, seeking information.
Yeah. Okay. Jeremiah 38, 17 through 18 and verse 20. So you get the point here. Then Jeremiah said to Zedekiah, thus says the Lord God of hosts, the God of Israel, if you will.
Michael Faber, again, just goat comment. Why would God be frustrated with what he caused? You might not be able to see that down there, but in the bottom right, Michael Faber's comment is, why would God be frustrated with what he caused? Exactly. Why be exasperated with something that you either caused or knew from all eternity would happen?
Indeed, go out to the officers of the king of Babylon, then you will live. This city will not be burned with fire, and you and your household will survive. But if you will not go out to the officers of the king of Babylon, then the city will be given over to the hand of the Chaldeans, and they will burn it with fire, and you yourself will not escape from their hand. Jeremiah said, they will not give you over. Please obey the Lord in what I am saying to you, that it may go well with you and you may live.
Yeah, the first part of that is just, again, a condition. If you surrender, the Babylonians won't wipe you out. If you don't surrender, they will. Okay. I suppose the openness people would take this kind of statement, which is like any other kind of conditional statement in the Bible, of which there are many, many conditional statements. It's just saying, well, the outcome isn't determined. The outcome is, and if it's undetermined, then God can't know what it is, because if he did, his knowing it would determine it. But that's, again, that's a question of how.
No, I would not phrase it that way. The knowledge of God does not determine anything. If anything, it's weirder because it means that something else determined the truth value of the thing that's going to happen other than God and other than the person doing it. The truth value is determined ahead of time by something other than the event itself transpiring. And that's part of what's so weird about this, and part of why it makes us so uneasy. It's indeterminate because it's neither true nor false until something takes place. It's an open question, what will happen?
How foreknowledge really affects necessity. I think the necessity that something, the fact that something will happen affects foreknowledge, not the other way around. By God knowing something, that makes it necessary. The question is, why does that thing happen? That's the unanswered part of that. And but another part is, how does God know that it's going to happen? Or does he? But if he does give evidence that he knows, how does he know? Well, those are interesting questions. I'm not even sure. But the question is not, does this tell me that God doesn't know something? No, he says, if you do this, if you do that, that'll happen. Does God know which they'll do? Well, I think he does. But it's still true that if they didn't do it, something else would have happened.
Yeah. Okay. Last passage here, Ezekiel chapter 12, verses 1-3 says, then the word of the Lord came to me saying, son of man, you live in the midst of the rebellious house, who have eyes to see, but do not see, ears to hear, but do not hear, for they are a rebellious house. Therefore, son of man, prepare for yourself baggage for exile, and go into exile by day in their sight, even go into exile from your place to another place in their sight. Perhaps they will understand, though they are a rebellious house.
Perhaps they will understand is the question here. Does God know whether they will? Maybe they will, maybe they won't. I don't. Again, we had a verse like that back in, I think it was in Jeremiah 26. It says, perhaps they will heed and change. I think I mentioned at the time, the wording definitely sounds as if God's not sure which way it'll go. Maybe they will, maybe they won't. The word perhaps means maybe. But again, I think that he's, again, resorting to the old commonplace answer. This is, I think, God speaking as if he was ignorant about things he's not really ignorant about.
Here we go.
It's our last scripture to talk about. This gets me back to one thing I tried to make clear at the beginning or earlier. And that is that we can decide that God is speaking, exactly according to his own limitations, or we can assume that God is speaking according to human limitations and revealing himself.
Or there's a third option, in that reality that God created is shaped in a certain way. He's not limited within the bounds of the reality that he created in any way, but the bounds of the reality that he created are real. And maybe he can't transcend time. He's not able to traverse moments backwards in backwards causation. So, for example, if something turns out in a way that God didn't want, he can't go back and change it. Something happened that is not something he can go back and change. And that's not a limitation on God, and that's not a limitation on us. That's a limitation of reality as God created it. That's how it operates. So I think it's a false dichotomy whether Steve was intending to do it that way or not. I tend to believe he wasn't trying to make a false dichotomy.
Relating to man as if he were on our level sense, not knowing the future either. A person can take either choice. My personal study of the scripture has concluded that there's a great deal, almost a consistent, anthropomorphistic way of talking about God's dealings with man throughout the Old Testament. And therefore, when I find something like that, it's not, to my mind, out of character. It's not surprising. If somebody is thinking, well, that's just an excuse for ignoring what's really being said here. Well, I don't think it's just an excuse. It's an explanation, but it may not be a correct one. I think it is. I think the evidence is for it. If someone says, well, I'm not going to accept that explanation, be my guess. No, just you go ahead and believe that God does know the future. I don't care. I mean, again, I could, if I concluded from scripture, I conclude that God doesn't know the future. So what? It wouldn't change a thing in my life. I don't live my life depending on God knowing the future. I do depend on God's faithfulness to keep his promises in the future. And that's all that really matters to me. And being sovereign and omnipotent and able to do whatever he feels need to do.
Amen.
I think there's an old illustration, but the illustration of a cruise ship going from New York to London, the captain knows where it's going to go because he's steering the ship. He doesn't know everything that the people on the ship are going to do. They might play shuffleboard, they might lay by the pool, they might gamble, they might drink, they might just lay in the sun. The captain doesn't know what they're all going to do, but it's not going to change anything about where the ship goes. These kinds of things. If God doesn't know what I'm going to do, it's not going to prevent his will from being done in my life.
Exactly.
So it doesn't really matter to me. My only reason for not being an open theist is that I'm not persuaded that the evidence. I
really love this answer from Steve, and again, I just really love Steve in general. But this is a very, very good answer because From my point of view, there's nothing that is ascribed to God's exhaustive knowledge of what will transpire in the future that isn't better and more biblically explained by his great wisdom and power and ability to get the outcomes he desires, even in the face of an indeterminate future, equally co-authored by humans and evil entities that hate God and his purposes. It is more praiseworthy. It is a greater testament to his greatness that we are not able to thwart his ultimate plans than it would be if he were able to move our hands in the chess match or have a exhaustive list of all of the things that we would do in the chess match. It's his wisdom and his power by which he brings things about. And that's a very praiseworthy thing. And whether you believe open theism or not, as long as we can all agree that God's wisdom and power is the way by which he causes things to come to pass and gets what he wants. Ultimately, maybe he loses skirmishes along the way and things don't go the way that he wants. That would be my contention. But as long as we can agree that God will have his purposes fulfilled, I think that we are really, I don't want to say that this is not important. I think it's massively important, but we have room for disagreement in the specifics.
I'm not rejecting it out of some kind of loyalty to a certain theory about the foreknowledge of God. I just reject it because I don't see that the biblical evidence is making that point very well. And because I see actually predicting future moral choices people make. I give the example of Moses saying, I know that after I'm gone, you're going to turn from God and deny yourselves. And Jesus saying to Peter, I know you're going to deny me 3 times before the cock crows, and then you'll repent. So to my mind, one can take either view, but the view you take has to be able to explain all the data. It's not enough that you have 40 verses that sound like they can be taken to support your view. If there's even a handful of verses that just don't work with your system.
It sounds like exactly what I said in my debate, but just kind of like turned on its head, right? My debate with James White. 100% of the evidence has to point your way. And if you're making an exhaustive foreknowledge view, 100% of all things that have ever transpired must be explicable on the pages of Scripture. Every verse needs to say that God knows 100% of all things that will happen. If there's any one verse that says that perhaps there's something that was indeterminate, then open theism becomes true. So it's kind of just an interesting difference here. But I love Steve Gregg so much, man. You've
got to choose your theology based on his proposition. Will quite naturally and comfortably explain all the data available. And so that's why I'm not yet, and I may never be, an openness theologian. But in saying it that way, it's very clear I'm not hostile to the view.
It's just so interesting. Again, like I wanted to let him cook for a minute and talk about that. But the fact of the matter is that the openness view is the only one that is flexible enough to accommodate all of those different things that truth values, all those different ways that truth values of future events come to be known ahead of time. God determines some things. God foreknows others through whether it's prediction, prognostication, whatever. It's not a bit of knowledge that is an inherent part of his being, co-equal to his nature that he has possessed from before the creation of the world as an eternal property of his being, like it is in some classical theist formulations. It's something that maybe arises from his exhaustive knowledge of the present, including the hearts of men and what they'll choose to do and what kinds of things they think and believe and feel in the moment and how they respond under pressure. But it's the only one that's flexible enough to allow for some things to be determined, some things to be foreknown, and some things to be open questions. But in this view, everything is foreknown. There are no open questions. This is the only view that's flexible enough to accommodate all of the data. And it's just funny that he agrees that what we need to do is pick the model that best fits all of the data, but he still thinks that the one that best explains the data and best explains the nature of reality and the shape of reality is the one where everything is foreknown and there are no open possibilities. I just find that very interesting because I used the same line of reasoning in my debate against James White, and I thought it was an effective case that I made, and apparently a lot of you agreed, but Steve is unconvinced.
I don't think it hurts someone to hold that view, but to me, I feel like if you're going to have any opinions about theology, you might as well have the right ones. And if the wrong ones won't hurt you. I'd rather have the right ones than the wrong ones, and that's why I'm not yet.
Well, Steve, whether you're right or wrong, one thing that I can attest to is you don't represent any particular organization that pays all your bills or has any command over what you're allowed to say or what you can believe in. In fact, that's very obvious to people who know anything about your history. You moved on the nature of hell. Certainly, it's still something that people lose positions over, but certainly at the time you did, you moved on your position on end times things, and that has not been popular during your lifetime and in the country you live in. So you're willing to move on it. So I take you at your word when you say, I'm just not convinced that that's what the Bible's giving us on this. Yeah. And I think most of these boil down to a few different things.
I'm gonna pause Braxton there because I want to speak on that. That is one of my favorite things about Steve Gregg. I mentioned it earlier. He is broadly an evidentialist. Wherever he thinks the scriptures are headed and whatever he thinks the scriptures attest to, that's what he's going to believe. If he has put himself into a position, and I would say that God has been amazingly good and faithful to Steve Gregg in that he's been an itinerant teacher, unbound to having a paycheck attached to his name for many, many years. He is a product, whether you believe the same things that he believes or not. He's not the product of outside ideological pressures trying to cause him to come to a certain stance. He is a single data point, and he's not infallible, but he is a person who has done the work without having been paid by an institution to do so to find certain conclusions. He is a person who has opened his scriptures, submitted himself to his Lord continually over a long period of time, and landed on the stances that he's landed upon firmly because he is convinced that it is the testimony of the scriptures what he's teaching, even if he felt crazy for doing it. This is one of the things that I am most grateful for about Steve, that I want to model in my own ministry, and that's why he's on my theological Mount Rushmore. Because that attitude alone, to say nothing about the radical trust in God for his provision, being an itinerant teacher and not getting a stable, steady paycheck, that willingness to just, I have a father, don't I? I'm going to trust that he's going to provide for me as a son. If I'm about my father's business, then why wouldn't he if he's a good father? And it's proven out. He looks great. I love it. I love him for this. And so that even if we don't agree, my goodness, have I ever got respect for that approach? I love that approach. I want to embody that approach. And that's why I've landed on open theism. But it's like, Steve, it's true, man. I want people to have the right beliefs. Why would I ever want people to hold the wrong beliefs? And I think that I've done that. I think he's convinced that he's done that. And I have confidence that if he and I were ever to talk and get into a room together, that we would have a lot of really good and positive things to talk about that may have nothing to do with these response videos that I'm making to his talking about the open theist proof text. But I love me some Steve Gregg. Let's see what Braxton has to say to close us out.
The Jesus issue that serves as a microcosm of God's knowledge of the future that you mentioned, the issue that even in passages where it seems like God does not know what's going to happen, he's talking about trying to get at what's in the heart of man, which we take him to already in the present know, and a few other things like that. I think that would be really helpful to people. So thank you so much for doing this. Is there anything else on this New Year's Day that you would like to say to wrap this up?
New Year's Day, wow.
No, but other than it's always a pleasure, Braxton, to be able to spend some time interacting with you. I hope the things we've said will be helpful to people, whether they believe in openness or not. I will say this. I never intended for my ministry to have this effect, but I have found, in retrospect, looking at it, a major aspect of my ministry is creating uncertainty. People who want to be theologians often are somewhat addicted to certainty. They want to find out what camp they're in and then dig in and have the approbation of everyone else in that camp. It's sort of like joining a club. And my book on the 4 views of hell, my book on 3 views of hell, 4 views of Revelation, those books do not advocate. They just raise questions. I mean, I write them with a mind not to persuade someone that I'm correct, because I'm not even sure I am, but to let them know that they don't have as much reason to believe they're correct as they think they do, and to not be afraid of uncertainty, not be afraid of saying, hey, I'm not really sure which way to go on this, but frankly, not knowing, because I know God, and that's what life is for, knowing God.
Yes.
And I can learn more about it as time goes by. I have definitely moved closer to a sympathy for openness theology over the past 4.5 decades, because I was debating against it in 1980. And I'm still, arguing against it, but I certainly have a lot of sympathy for the mentality of those who adopt it. And I certainly see how some of these scriptures, at first glance anyway, to be strong supports for it. So I've got no disrespect for the view. You're going to persuade me with better text than those.
And I should say that you did not ask to come on and talk about this topic. I reached out to you with this topic. And I would love it if you'd be willing to give this treatment to another topic at some point. But thank you so much, Steve, for the time that you've spent with us here today. And for everyone out there, I will try.
Have him do it to dispensationalism. Have him do it to the doctrine of the church, ecclesiology. Have him do it to premillennialism. That would be solid gold. I'd love to hear him do those, because frankly, I think his answers are a heck of a lot more compelling for those subjects, because frankly, he's a lot more knowledgeable and doesn't just have to punt to anthropomorphism, and this passage doesn't mean what it says when he does those things. He's one of my very favorite resources on any of those things. I came to hold the views that I hold as it relates to those things well in advance of my ever having come across Steve Gregg, but then when Steve Gregg started saying the same things that I was saying in that way, I felt a lot less crazy. So, he's top 4, top 5 all-time favorite theologian for me. I love his work. Let's see if there's
we'll try to get the chapters divided for this video, maybe on Monday, if not before. Steve, I hope you have a happy new year. I hope everyone else does. Thank you again so much for your time. And you stay with me on while I shut everybody else off. So to the rest of you,
I love that. When I was on Trinity Radio, I also had a nice long extra conversation with Braxton Hunter and Jonathan Pritchett afterwards, after the stream ended, and it was a great time. They're wonderful people. And so is Steve Gregg. I'm really grateful that I know about his ministry and that God has used him so mightily for so many different years in the lives of so many different people. Even if I think he misses the mark here. God bless Steve Gregg for his ministry. Thank you guys so much for staying on. I know we're getting pretty long in the last couple of videos here. I really wanted to make sure that I got through them so that it's not 2 or 3 months after this video is released that I'm making responses. I think that they could have gotten someone a lot nastier to come in and talk down about open theism, and that they chose Steve Gregg is just very, he's a very kind person. I think that there would have been a little bit more, I would have been more tempted, maybe tested by going through and pushing back a little bit more on someone who wasn't quite as genial as Steve Gregg is. But yeah, I'd much rather give Steve Gregg a hug than push him. So thanks, guys. Appreciate you all, and may God continue to bless you.